Moi. Donc, la jeunesse montréalaise, on l'a appris, elle a un rôle essentiel à jouer dans le dynamisme, comme je le disais, dans la bienveillance aussi de la vie nocturne de la métropole. Et justement, en lien avec cette dite bienveillance-là, la cohabitation, on en a fait mention, ça reste souvent un défi dans de nombreuses zones urbaines, pas seulement à Montréal. Et cela dit, il existe des solutions pour favoriser le vivre ensemble. Et c'est un sujet qui passionne le prochain invité que je vais vous présenter. Il s'appelle Méric Milan. C'est un des premiers maires de la nuit au monde qui a joué un rôle déterminant dans la transformation de la vie nocturne d'Amsterdam, ville magnifique. Il a contribué à mettre en place des politiques publiques de gouvernance nocturne innovantes qui sont produites partout dans le monde, entre autres dans les grandes villes comme New York, comme Paris, comme Londres. Aujourd'hui, Méric Milan, dis-je, il est cofondateur de Vibe Lab, qui est une firme de consultation sur la gouvernance nocturne. Et il est aussi fondateur, dis-je, du Global Nighttime Recovery Plan, une initiative de relance de la vie nocturne mondiale qui regroupe plus de 120 villes dans le monde. Bonjour, Méric. Hi, Méric. Nice to meet you.
Hi, how's it going, Nicolas? Hey.
I'm going well. I'm doing good. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about what is the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan.
Yeah, for sure. When the pandemic hit, we were all in shock and we realized we needed to do something. So we brought together all the night mayors of the world, club commissions, officers of nightlife, and we brought them all in one WhatsApp group. And then secondly, what we did, we brought all the nighttime scientists that we knew from all over the world, and we also brought them in a WhatsApp group to exchange information and to understand how we should deal with this pandemic. And that was the moment like the light bulb hit, and we decided to say, well, we have to bring all this knowledge together. We have to publish it as well. So that was the moment when we decided to start the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan, which is a collaborative effort of night mayors, practitioners, scientists, researchers, to bring together strategies and approaches to understand how to deal, how to recover from COVID. So we focused on a variety of topics. We have published already 6 chapters, which are free to download for everyone who wants. You can find them on nighttime.org. Simple as that. The 7th chapter is upcoming, and we deal with all kinds of topics that are related to the nighttime economy. So not only nightlife, but it's really about all facets from the 24-hour economy to transport, but also, of course, to safety and health regulations. So that's my short answer.
Yeah, that was a great answer. So if there's something to know about the nighttime recovery, you can go nighttime.org and you got it right there. The more brains there are, the more great solutions come up. And I think it's a really, really, really great initiative. Méric, you've prepared for us a case study panel on Sydney's management of nighttime activities. Can you tell us a little bit before seeing the panel, what's the story there?
Oh yes, the story of Sydney it's a long one, and I think what is really interesting about this story is that it really shows it's really important to bring together all the stakeholders that operate at night, to bring them to the table and to think about solutions that propel our cities forward, but on the other hand also make our cities safer. And if we make decisions only based on, so we really have to make educated decisions. We have to use data to support these decisions, because if we all only listen to, if we only focus on what is happening on that day and we don't bring all the stakeholders together, then you will probably make decisions which you say later down the line, to say, well, oh, this hasn't been good for our nighttime economy. You know, we lost, if we clamp down on nightlife too hard, you lost all the beautiful things that it brings from social, cultural, and economic perspective. And the tremendous loss of nightlife spaces in Sydney is the reason why there is now a really well-functioning governance system.
So I guess that's something that we always need to think about when it comes to thinking about the nighttime economy and the nightlife in general, is having a global vision of what it should be and not only trying to address the problems that are in front of us, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we really have to be have to focus on making sure that the people that everyone uses can use the city in the same way, you know. And we have to protect the quality of life of the city residents. We need to make sure how we can make our cities attractive for foreign investment or local investment, and we need to make sure that our cities are livable, you know. And for me personally, what the night has brought has changed my view, and it showed me that the world is much more colorful and diverse than maybe my own background is, and that is something you can only learn maybe at night, and that is where we open up to each other, and where we have shared responsibilities to take care of in a proper way.
So that's a challenge for everybody in everyday life, seeing the life in the perspectives of many people and diverse people. Sometimes it can be hard, but when it's done and it's done right, it gives great results. So Mirek, thank you for this little chat. We're going to go see your panel right now.
Hello and welcome to the Montreal Night Summit. Before I introduce all the guests of this panel conversation, I want to say great work to everyone on the ground in Montreal for hosting this amazing event, Montreal 2024, and of course the city of Montreal. My name is Mirek Milan. I'm based in Amsterdam, and I will be moderating this panel. I was the former night mayor of Amsterdam, and currently running a purpose-driven consultancy called Vibe Lab. This session is called Fostering Better Coexistence, Managing Nighttime Uses in Sydney, Australia. So this conversation will be all about Australia. I've been traveling to Australia since 2016, and I have saw a lot of things changing, and that's really exciting that we can share this information with you. All cities around the world working on nighttime governance. They are all on a different timeline, but we're all somewhere else. And that's why it's so interesting to share information between cities. So to kick off, I would like to introduce the panelists of this conversation. I will start with Jane Slingo. She's Executive Director of the Electronic Music Conference and has a career in electronic music for spanning over 3 decades. She is also on the board of Music New South Wales and, of course, a co-founder of Global Cities After Dark. Welcome, Jane. Secondly, Libby Harris, a 9-time city manager from the city of Sydney. She has been a public safety specialist for more than 30 years and has a vast experience in coordinating multidisciplinary teams and deliver positive community and economic outcomes. You know, one of the highlights of her career was delivering the Open Sydney strategy for the nighttime economy, and has been a real advocate also in the recent years, getting the nighttime economy in Sydney back on its feet. Welcome to you, Libby, as well.
Thanks, Mary.
Last but not least, Michael Rodriguez. Currently, he's the 24-hour commission of New South Wales, but he also had spotted the opportunity to bring time out to Sydney back in 2007, I have to say. But apart from that, he also established the Nighttime Industries Association back in November 2018, because all the things that were happening in Sydney. And through that role, he advocated strongly on to make sure that nightlife in Sydney got back on its feet. Currently, just installed, he's the 24-hour economy commissioner, a role just created by New South Wales, and I think it's a really important position to have in the city. So also, Michael, welcome to this panel conversation.
Thanks.
We would like to kick off with, as I said, a lot has happened in Sydney over the past years, and we would like to kick off this conversation with a presentation from the three of our panelists. They would like to really take a deep dive into what happened in Sydney over the years, to give you a clear understanding about all the steps and all the campaigns and all the people that were involved in the recent years to coming to this point. We're having a city nighttime economy city manager, somebody on state level, and of course the industry, like somebody like Jane. because all these actors play a very big role in the nighttime economy of Sydney. So I would like to ask the tech department to start the presentation, so we can kick off with an in-depth insight in what happened in the last years. So we'll be handing over to my panelists to take you through this story. This is the kickoff slide, so fostering better coexistence, managing uses of Sydney. So maybe we can take on the next slide, because we're diving back into the 90s actually.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I'll kick off. So just to give you a bit of a background of, I guess, where we've been and how we got to where we are now, is very quickly. So I'll go pretty rapidly, hopefully. So in the 1990s, in preparation for the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games, the state government here deregulated liquor licensing to make sure we had enough hospitality venues to actually cater for the millions of people that would arrive in Sydney for the Olympics. Effectively, lifting the cap on liquor licenses led to an uncontrollable proliferation of licensed venues, which grew, exponentially from that period. The King's Cross, Sydney CBD area and our Oxford Street precincts were designated 24-hour zones as well for the 2000 Olympic Games specifically. Next slide, thanks. So the 2000s, I'm going in sort of decades, really saw an increasing density of licensed venues and the accumulating impacts that resulted in quite high rates of violence. It was an era of a youth culture that was actually really obsessed with binge drinking, and there was a trend of unprovoked, what we called king hits or one-punch assaults. There was 127 one-punch deaths in Australia over a 6-year period from 2000 to 2016. 73% of these fatalities included alcohol, and 94% of them were one-punch victims were male. The graph here, you'll see the line from the bottom left to the top right represents the growth in licensed premises. So it grew from 66 premises in 1995 to over 1,700 by 2015. The other two lines you see sort of going downward from the centre down. We've flipped over to the next slide. Oh, no, we haven't, sorry. Basically represents the alcohol-related assaults at night, which peaked in 2008 before commencing a downward trend. With the deregulation of licensing in Sydney, there was no mechanism to stop that increase in licensed venues, all aggregating in small areas, resulting in massive impacts with assaults. So this resulted in essentially a law enforcement style approach to actually trying to control the violence. And also we at the City of Sydney developed some planning controls to try and reduce the impacts. The lines here you'll see as that sort of trend, so peaking in 2008. The two vertical lines you'll see represent 2012 and 2014, where we introduced precinct regulations, or state government introduced precinct regulations for the city centre and the King's Cross areas. There was a significant reduction in assaults after the lockouts in 2014. However, it was really the continuation of an existing trend. The City of Sydney Council always sort of called for a more nuanced approach than the blanket approach, which was the lockout laws. But this was just to demonstrate it was the violence was already trending down. Next slide, please. So the fallouts from the lockout laws that were introduced in 2014 was actually that a lot of people just stopped coming into the city at night. So it was like a significant reduction in nightlife businesses in the city centre. So there was a retraction of 7%. We estimated the opportunity cost was 2,000 jobs and $1 billion in turnover, 50% decline in actually restaurants trading after midnight. And most importantly, we also lost a lot of live music venues, and creative industries moved out of the city. And also significantly, over 500,000 visitors under the age of 35 essentially stopped coming to Sydney. Next slide, thanks. The 2010s was a real turning point for us as far as mindset and how we were actually approaching the problem. It was a decade of reset and reimagining. So this was essentially where the City of Sydney Council sought to reframe the problem of alcohol-related violence to look at actually what the solution was and develop our strategy, which was the Open Sydney strategy, which is really looking at what people wanted from the city at night rather than looking at the problem. Despite the decreasing number of assaults year on year, there still continue to be high rates of violence. And this resulted in some quite high-profile deaths, one in 2012, a second one in 2014, and effectively a lot of media pressure on the government to do something, which essentially resulted in 2014, you may have heard of the infamous lockout laws that were introduced in early 2014. This was a really catalytic turning point for Sydney, where for the first time ever, businesses had their social licence to operate actually taken away for the first time. Over to you, Jane.
2014 as executive producer of EMC, which is an electronic music conference and festival. The impact on the businesses within our industry were immediate. Clubs and late night venues were obviously the first to experience the impacts of those lockout laws when they were introduced. And just as an indication, our festival attendance decreased by over 75% the year after the lockout laws were introduced. In February 2016, Keep Sydney Open held its first rally in Sydney. Reports varied between 10,000 and 15,000 people in attendance, but regardless of that number, it was the first protest that put the issue of Sydney's nighttime economy on the agenda and demonstrated en masse the importance of nightlife to creative and young people in Sydney. The following month, in March 2016, the New South Wales Government announced a series of nighttime economy roundtables with the aim to agree on a process of actions by the second half of that year. And in August 2016, that New South Wales Government nighttime economy roundtable released its 25-point action plan. All of the actions in this plan detailed a 1 to 12-month priority or impact timeframe for every action in that plan. In November that same year, 2016, EMC hosted Merrick Milan as a headline keynote speaker for our annual conference. As well as his speaking engagement, Merrick also hosted a workshop at Town Hall for nighttime economy businesses within the City of Sydney local government area. And that week, Merrick and I conceptualised the idea of a summit to bring together Sydney nighttime economy leaders, government and creatives with international nightlife specialists. We took the idea to Levée at City of Sydney, and with the help of a City of Sydney Knowledge Exchange grant, we launched Global Cities After Dark in 2017. It's run annually in Sydney in the 4 years since, and it kind of provides an annual health check of the nighttime economy sector, and it's also it's a cross-sector collaboration to continually navigate the new challenges and explore new opportunities within the rebirthing of Sydney's nightlife. In 2017, the New South Wales Parliament established an inquiry into the music and arts economy in New South Wales, and that inquiry's purpose was to report on the implementation of the government response to the New South Wales Nighttime Economy Roundtable Action Plan, to look at policy and legislation, and to look at potential red tape reductions. 437 written submissions were received by that inquiry, and 5 hearings were held in Sydney where 92 people from the music and arts sectors appeared to give evidence. The next year, in 2018, City of Sydney formed its inaugural Nightlife and Creative Sector Advisory Panel comprising 15 experts within Sydney's nighttime economy. The panel to this day still advises the city on new initiatives and identifies emerging issues and opportunities for Sydney's nighttime economy. In 2018, Michael Rodriguez founded the Nighttime Industries Association, of which he served as chair until March 2021. In May 2019, New South Wales Parliament launched another inquiry, but this time an inquiry into Sydney's nighttime economy. It aimed to ensure that existing regulatory arrangements in relation to individuals, businesses and other stakeholders, including Sydney's lockout laws, remained appropriately balanced, and it also aimed to enhance Sydney's nighttime economy. 793 written submissions were received and 3 hearings were held in Sydney in August that year, where over 79 nighttime economy specialists gave evidence. In September 2019, the Joint Select Committee for that parliamentary inquiry into Sydney's nighttime economy released its report and recommendations, and the recommendations included the removal of the lockout laws and the appointment of an overarching coordinator to bring together all the relevant stakeholders to enhance Sydney's nighttime economy. And in November 2019, the New South Wales government announced that the lockout laws would be lifted in Sydney CBD and Oxford Street from 14 January 2020, and that the lockout laws in King's Cross would be reviewed 12 months after that. Next slide.
Okay, back to me, I think now. Thanks, Jane. We'll get to you, Mike, soon enough. So 2020 started off really positively for us here in Sydney. So as Jane mentioned, the lifting the lockouts happened in January last year. This was 8 weeks before the pandemic hit, so you can imagine our dismay. So after all of the years of advocacy, the New South Wales government finally established a 24-hour economy strategy and an office where it would be coordinated from across government. And Mike was appointed as the inaugural 24-hour economy commissioner in March this year. Economic recovery from the pandemic is primarily centred on the hospitality industry, and this is really in an effort to bring people back out of their homes and back into the city. We've also had really successful advocacy campaigns from industries such as I Lost My Gig, Keep Our Venues Alive and Save Our Stages New South Wales, which have resulted in record investment into Sydney's cultural sector throughout 2020. Also in March this year, the New South Wales government announced a $24 million lifeline for live music venues in New South Wales. This is absolutely unprecedented. It's a record investment and the first time ever the government's invested in for-profit cultural venues, which is a stark contrast to back in 2014. So I hand over to you, Mike.
Great, thank you. Maybe next slide. So I guess and thanks for the great preamble, because now we're starting to look to the future. So I'm 2 months into the role, which was essentially, it's really best to think of it as a nightmare, but at a regional level. So we have 3 levels of government here, and it's a 24-hour economy description because there's different views on whether it should be called nighttime economy or 24-hour economy. But the rationale for the role has now become one of an economic imperative, and this has really been demonstrated by the pandemic, as Libby touched on, in that once everyone now realises what happens when you can't go out at all, and so I find myself taking on a strategy that was largely written during the pandemic, and now thinking about how to apply it not only to bring about a 24-hour economy that represents the best practice, but also as part of an overall government economic strategy to see the economy recover. And I think what's interesting is that when you take a long look at this, there's a couple of salient points. One is that it's very much akin to that 1990s story about Sydney getting ready for the Olympics. Obviously, economies globally have been impacted by COVID, and the question now becomes, how will cities be positioned for the future? Which will emerge out of the pandemic ahead of others, potentially? What opportunities that give rise to? And so I mentioned the 90s because that was the last time that we saw deregulation, and now in Sydney and New South Wales in 2021, we are, I guess, on another journey, which is into deregulation. And the challenge for me, the challenge for all the actors, everyone on this panel, is to ensure that we don't see a going back, or, as I like to say, a pendulum that swings from one extreme to the other. We want to find a way of making sure that things even out in the middle, and we don't see a return to incidents that have occurred in the past. And so that's my first job, and really, like as has been touched on in the discussion, it is a coordinating role across many areas of government. There's 10 different government departments that have an impact on going out, across police, health, transport, and so forth. And then there's a number of sectors, all with a vested interest in ensuring that they can provide a good experience for consumers, and also in so doing, I guess, enjoy the economic benefit of that. And from a city perspective, of course, what we're hoping to see is improved amenity for citizens. Why all of this is important, and I guess to bring us to where we are today, is that as economies look to come out of the pandemic, and this is, I can speak for New South Wales, we are hoping to attract talent and capital to Sydney. And those things are needed in order to create new industries, new jobs. The world is different now. What are the jobs of the future? And because of the learnings, we understand now that if you want jobs and you want talent, it's important to have a vibrant nighttime economy, because people like being inspired, they like going out, they like enjoying the best things that the city has to offer. So that sort of takes us through to today, and now we're at the start of a really exciting journey. We may go to the next slide at this stage. And as I touched on, the role for this to be successful, it's a mass stakeholder alignment issue, and so, as I mentioned, all the government departments. I think the City of Sydney is a key partner for the 24-hour economy strategy, it being the central business district, and I think a large geographic and economic powerhouse for not only the state but the country. And then, of course, there are a number of industry participants across, as I'm sure you would have in wherever you are watching this from. And so it's really about trying to make sure that all these participants produce the best product or the best experience for people to go out in. And if we can get this right, then we think we'll be on a winner. I think that might be the last slide, but maybe just check.
Yeah. That's the end of the slides.
Maybe I'll hand back to our esteemed chair, Miri, who can ask us the hard questions.
Oh, no audio.
No audio, you're on mute.
Thanks for explaining the timeline of Sydney and what happened over the years. I think there will be a lot of cities that are actually facing the same problems when it comes to the working relationship between the different tiers of government, and that's also something I would like to touch on. But before we dive into the questions I've lined up, the term lockout laws, it was referred to a couple of times, but maybe there's people that don't really know what a lockout law is. What did it mean what does it mean in terms of what happened basically for the venues, and how were they operating hours restricted? Maybe Jane, could you quickly answer that one?
Sorry, Merrick, can you just repeat that last bit? I just got distracted by a message pinging, sorry.
Okay, sorry. No, so the lockout laws, like the term was dropped a couple of times, but maybe not everyone knows what a lockout law means for an operator. And there was a strong decline, of course, in venues But what does it?
course.
What actually does it mean?
So the lockout was essentially that if you left a venue, a club or a bar or a live music venue, if you left after 1:30 in the morning, you were locked out. You couldn't come back in, essentially. So thus the name lockout. So there was still trade. There were still trade options after 1:30 in the morning, but essentially, it took away that ability for people to navigate their way through a variety of different businesses in that kind of time bracket of that 1:30 to 3 or 4 a.m., which was usually a time where people would like to go to a late night bar, maybe go to a club, maybe catch a show, and so essentially it kind of cut off that foot traffic after 1:30 a.m. So people would have to leave the CBD area to either continue their night in a zone that did not have those lockout laws in place, or go home.
Yeah, and but for the people that might say that minimizing alcohol-related violence, that the lockout laws were a good thing because the violence went down. What do you reply to that?
Who, me or to Libby?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah.
I mean, there was I think as Libby kind of touched on earlier in the deck, there was already a downward trend anyway. Whilst we also saw a reduction in violence, we also saw a wholesale shedding of venues as well. So we saw a huge reduction in that foot traffic as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was actually probably more a factor of no people than any there was no miracle about it. It was really no people, no violence, essentially. So that was a factor of that more than anything else.
Yeah, and so nowadays the lockout laws have been removed. There have been a lot of people spoke their voice. How did you establish? Because there's now all the levels of government are working together in a better way. The industry has been really vocal. How did you came to that point to create this? Michael, maybe you want to respond to this.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy this discussion because oftentimes I hear people say, I did this and I did that. And of course, anyone who says I did something means that they probably weren't that effective as they thought, because the reality is there's been hundreds of people working together in collaboration across various levels. 3 or 4 of us are on this call. My relationship or my journey into the role that I now sit was a function of attending Global Cities After Dark in 2017 and so on and so forth. I think the thing is, and this is why the primary actors, and in particular at government level, need to have a vision, because it's only if you have a vision can you have people align around something. And of course, no one knows exactly how the strategy will be executed, and but you need to have a roadmap. And if you can establish a roadmap, then at least you can measure against, you can align people against something. If they've got a problem with it, they can explain their issue. And so, for example, with the 24-hour economy strategy for the state, it's been done in consultation with police and health areas of government. It's not been done by an industry body and been recommended as a solution. And so maintaining alignment between these participants is really, I think, on the thing on which this will, succeed or not succeed. And I don't know, all I'd say is that generally speaking, it always comes down to the human relationships, I think is a key part. And then establishing what success looks like and measuring. I think that governments can really only act off the basis of data, or with reference to data, and I think that that's a really key part in making sure that the alignment behind that vision can be maintained.
Yeah, thanks. So and Libby, from your side, is what do you think has changed, and what is different now? Because there might be a new crisis in the future, and how do you think you would cope with it this time around?
Yeah. Look, Merrick, as Mike and Jane have alluded to, it's taken many years and many people working together and collaborating, and to Mike's point around a vision and a strategy. So I think the City of Sydney's strategy, which was developed back in 2013, has provided that roadmap or that vision, that mechanism for people to rally around, which is, we often talk about the narrative here in Sydney. So I think everyone, having a shared outcome and a shared goal and vision for the city is key. And really, building alliances over time and building trust and relationships and as Mike said, across government, across industry, all of the players need to be involved in that. And I think we've invested a lot of time over the past really 10 years to do that. So it does take time. It's a slow burn. But I think now, fingers crossed, but I think if there were shocks and there were issues that we had to deal with, we now have a plan there's alignment between state and local government. We would be able to, rather than react, we can look to the future and we can work together on the solutions rather than being more reactive, which is what happened essentially with the lockouts and the state government. There was a huge pressure for them to react and do something. Now we can point to the vision and the plan, and I think that's key, and everyone is aligned at the moment, which is great.
Mary, can I just chip in with something which I think is quite important, and I guess traces my own journey, which was that it's so important for industry to be organised. And prior to starting the Nighttime Industries Association, I helped establish the Independent Bars Association, and that gave voice and coordination to two important parts of the sector, and it was important that happened, and we saw the benefit of that during the pandemic. So leaving aside the 24-hour economy strategy and all the chest beating, when the pandemic hit, there was a way for industry to be able to communicate its issues to government in a way that would not be possible if industry wasn't organised. So I think that part of the go forward, so if there are other issues, and I think we live in a world where, and Sydney's story was lockout, then bushfires, then the pandemic, so we've had these other events that most people think are now going to become part of climate crisis, all these things. Industry organisation is such an important part of making sure that you have a resilient sector, I think.
Yeah, and that is, I think that is so true and so important. Jane, in that process, was it easy to get everyone? Because in the end, everyone came together. There were mass protests on the street as well with Keep Sydney Open. Was it easy for everyone to get behind a common goal, in your opinion?
No, I mean it's taken years, and there's obviously between the cultural and the creative sector and the government side, there was a really deep feeling of antagonism for many years. I mean, as you know, Mary, that was one of the key drivers for us when we conceptualized Global Cities After Dark. It was like, how do we get these people in a room together, because we're never going to be able to navigate our way through these challenges if A, those sides don't understand each other's worlds better, and B, we're just never going to be able to sort through these problems unless we do actually get together and do it together. And there's still, I mean, it's not like we've waved a magic wand and there's none of that. It's still, there are still actors in the sector that through the pandemic have just, think that because certain types of businesses get restricted when there's, an outbreak of COVID cases, and, as you know, in Australia, we go through different snap lockdowns. So, the nighttime economy can be on a bit of a seesaw with open and shutting. there is still, amongst some actors, a feeling that like, oh, this is because the government, hate us and don't want culture to exist. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. There's just been an absolutely unprecedented record investment from the government into, live music venues, for example, with that $24 million fund. So it's an ongoing process, but from where we were in 2014 to 2016 especially, we are absolutely way more aligned than we were before.
Yeah, that's amazing how things can really change over time, but also how much effort. And I think that's also a message what the three of you are all sending out, how much time and effort it takes to get everyone together and get everyone unified. I want to shift the conversation a little bit more towards the future. Of course, post-pandemic, we all see that music and nightlife, nighttime economy will be a vehicle for recovery. And I was wondering, Michael, if you could tell us a little bit more about, how will Sydney prepare to welcome nighttime tourists post-pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the way I look at this is that, and Jane just mentioned, but we have governments now spending money in the going out economy, which is unusual. And I'm sure in other parts of the world there are similar programs, but essentially you're being paid to go out here. And long may that continue, but obviously it won't. But I do think that the government will continue to look to help stimulate over the next for so long as it sort of takes to establish a level of stability in the going out economy. And as Jane mentioned, we have these snap lockdowns, and it makes it very hard for a lot of businesses to trade, but also for people to work in that sector because the potential of or the belief that there is no job stability. So I think that my mind spends a lot of time thinking about how that government spend can be best put to use to create an asset for the future. And I think key to this understanding is two things. One is that government isn't necessarily expert when it comes to delivering what I call social infrastructure. In our world, it's quite often common for governments to work with the private sector to deliver buildings and rail assets and these things. But delivering a new going out economy, well, that's a thing. It's different, right? Like the things that inspire people or how creativity exists or where culture comes from, it's not easily controlled or defined in a specification against ISO standards. So that's the one concept. The other concept is, and I think this is a real thing that I'm conscious of in Sydney, is that because of this event we have with lockout, I think that there's a slight risk that people's imagination of what good looks like is actually in the past, as in we remember when, as opposed to what does nightlife look like in 2040. And the reality is that consumption habits have changed. There's the rise of at-home entertainment. I won't bore everyone with all those sorts of stories, but we need to reimagine and as I say, use if we can, data to see what consumers want from their city, because I think the broadest question for the going out economy is how does it compete with the at-home entertainment on-demand economy? And so if I think that's what the next frontier looks like. And I guess like an economies, I'm glad to say, are coming out of the pandemic, but here in Sydney, New South Wales, because of the history, it's been hard, but happily we have a strategy. We have someone in charge, coordinating within government. We have people who are aligned, industry bodies set up. We should be well placed to explore these concepts and hopefully work together. I think that and I try and spend a lot of time convincing businesses the value of being organised and investing. It's kind of like, don't stop now. Now's the time to invest, because in industry organisation and product research, if you can, because you've done the hard part, which is getting started and establishing yourself. If you dismantle these organisations now, it would have all been for nothing.
Yeah. Hey, and looking at the future, Michael, when you say, hey, so you're the 24-hour commissioner, do you see a 24, or there are many cities, world-renowned cities, that don't have a curfew? Earlier in this conversation, we spoke about that opening up the amount of liquor licenses has led to a really big increase, of course, in the nighttime economy, but also a big increase in violence. Do you see any? I'm not saying we were speaking of 2040, but do you see any possibilities of having wider opening hours in Sydney, or is that something which is like likely just in the future?
No, yeah, I absolutely do, Mirik. I think that it's really about choice, isn't it? And as Phil Colvin would say, if someone wants to buy an aubergine at 3 a.m. in the morning, they should be allowed to. They should be able to. It's not about a whole city trading 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's about making sure that everyone has access to choice at the time that they need it. That includes people like going out late or people who finish shifts at 2 in the morning. So there's work to be done in this, but as with many things, the pandemic has accelerated thinking around it. And I think, so from a regulatory perspective, there is scope for 24-hour trade. It will take a little bit of time for the regulatory system to fully allow it, for a new venue, for example, starting up, but also for the capacity there, i.e. the demand to be there, and for the businesses to be able to deliver the product because of things like physical distancing. As you know, we're still under capacity restrictions here in Sydney. So I can see a day where that comes, and I think going back to some of the other concepts talked about on this panel, narrative is so important around this. And one thing Sydney is blessed with is a diverse, multicultural population, and in that diversity lies some of the answer. We have populations here that don't come from high consumption alcohol cultures, like so large Muslim populations, Chinese populations, people in the subcontinent. And these are all places that enjoy late night cultural activity. And so a big chunk of my job is really about telling those stories and showing what success looks like in and around different cultural practice in a city. 24-hour economy doesn't necessarily mean we need nightclubs open serving alcohol, 24 hours a day. It's about being able to enjoy the amenity of a city. And from an economic perspective for government, it's much like if you had a hotel, you want that thing filled 365 days a year with customers churning through. Any asset is there to be used. So that's part of the thinking around this and the rationale for the state government strategy here. But maintaining that narrative and making sure you achieve that right balance, between the different actors is the essential part.
Yeah, thank you. So we are coming to the end of this conversation. I have heard a lot about diversifying the offering. That will be also the leading the way in the future for Sydney's nightlife. Definitely also the consumption has changed a lot. And to close off this panel, I would like all of you to give a short final statement, or what kind of advice, because this being the first night summit in Montreal, and their timeline maybe has just started when it comes to nighttime governance. So maybe if all of you can give a quick statement about what are your views for the future and what would you advise. So I will start with Libby, and then Jane and Michael get a really short buzz.
Yeah, thanks, Merrick. Look, I think, the future is about, for us at the City of Sydney, it is about the diversity. So it is about leisure and entertainment for people of all ages, backgrounds and interests. And I think with that, a massive untapped opportunities here in Sydney, and I'm sure all around the world. Quite often nightlife is a little bit monoculture. So really, tapping into those opportunities is key. And I think, that collaboration across sectors and in collaboration with government is fundamental to success. And having a plan, a roadmap forward, and a vision for the city is again, fundamental to being able to move forward successfully.
And I'd just probably love to say that the reform journey of Sydney has been very long, and there's still a long way to go, and it has required very committed, passionate and hardworking individuals that have put in many hours of really hard and often thankless work, and that is ultimately what is required ongoing. To have things like the vision that Mike has and the visions that we all have for the future of Sydney to actually come to fruition is going to demand that work to continue.
My answer is a little bit self-referential, but it relates to, I guess, my own journey, which it was over that 3 years. What have I learned? And as demonstrated by some of our politicians, no one wanted to talk about this politically 4 years ago. And now it's become the centerpiece of our economic strategy to attract global talent and investment to Sydney. The ability to listen is something that I observed amongst a number of our elected representatives. And as I've gone into this government role, I find myself trying not to say too much and listen and take on board input from industry experts, from businesses, and from all those stakeholders. And in so doing, develop the knowledge to best align all those pieces of the puzzle. So for me, at least for me specifically, listen.
Well, thank you all. I applaud you for the hard work you have been doing in the recent years. Thanks for the conversation. We will handing back to Nicola in the studio, and thanks for listening in.
Thanks, Merrick.
The sound is not, there's no sound.
Ah, vous n'avez pas de son. Méric n'a pas de son, mais c'est pas tellement grave. Dans quelques instants, on va se dire au revoir. On va parler aussi du programme auquel on va avoir droit demain. Mais avant toute chose, je ne sais pas si le son est revenu. Is the sound back, Méric? Can you hear me well? Yeah, good. So before letting you go, we'd like to, further go down this conversation. And we have one question for some member of the public that I'd like to ask you to start off. Here's the question. The person is asking, what were the impacts of a 24-24 economy on live music venues, on their revenues and perennity?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because I can combine the story of Sydney with the story of Amsterdam. I think it's really important if we want to stimulate our nighttime economy. It's really important that we, first of all, align all tiers of government with each other. But secondly, also make sure that we're not just giving out licenses to anybody at any place, but really think about zoning. I'm not a big forestander of entertainment districts because then you get a whole kinds of different issues. But it's really about coming up with smart licensing schemes. And for example, we introduced 24-hour licenses in Amsterdam, but not just for the whole city. It was really in specific zones. But we actually looked at the creative content, and if a venue had a multidisciplinary approach. So if the venue had multiple functions, that you can operate 24/7, but also have more functions. So think about gallery, co-working space, nightclub, of course, but also a lot of public functions that people in the neighborhood might use. So that this venue is an integral part of the neighborhood and the community. And that introduction had a really big impact on Amsterdam. All the people that performed at these venues, they have now international careers. There was a lot of talent development happening for the creative industry, and as I just explained, these venues had a positive impact on the neighborhood they lived in. They are placed in. So that's, I think, a learning from the Sydney example is stimulate your nighttime economy. Not just to give out any license to anybody, but think about how you can smartly organize this, and this will affect the economic and cultural impact of these venues on the city.
Yeah, so there's a kind of, I'd say, quality control. There's a kind of also thinking about how people will use these 24 hours, establishments, and how they can be useful to the citizens in the place. Mirik, I'd like to talk to you about the post-pandemic world, because tomorrow the conversations here in Montreal will be almost all about that, here in a local point of view and in an international point of view. I'd like to know how it's going in the Netherlands for you, in Amsterdam and elsewhere.
Yeah. So first of all, what is happening in the Netherlands is the Dutch government has really invested a lot of time and energy in first doing a lot of trial events, the field lab events, and from that field lab events, it showed that it's really possible to have organized safe events when you do gate testing or testing at the gate. So the Dutch government is investing 800 million euros in the coming 4 or 5 months into gate testing. That's a free service. Everyone can do it. And so that's really, really interesting. So from the end of this month, we will have festivals can have 25,000 capacity as a maximum. And from on that afterwards, it is full capacity, but with testing at the gate. So that's a very positive news. Although I'm still afraid that nightlife and music venues in small confined spaces will still have restrictions. But instead of saying, oh, we have to stop 2 hours earlier, we have to say, why don't we widen up the opening hours so there's more people in the space, more people can be in the space, and they don't all arrive at the same time or have to leave at the same time. If you want to keep a bit of distance, then widen the opening hours instead of closing them down, I mean.
I think hearing that $800 million invested by the government and the idea of having 25,000 people in the same place at the same time is making a lot of people in Montreal dream. But I guess we'll get there at some point. Mirik, it's been a pleasure having you with us. Thanks for the conversation about the Sydney situation, and I wish you the best for what's to come for you.
Thank you so much, and we hope to see each other in real life in Montreal in the future.
Of course, sooner than later, I hope. Bye-bye.